A young nurse, Jessica, rushed into the corridor and called for the senior nurse. She asked her to summon the department head to the patient's room, who had regained consciousness after a long coma. Then she hurried back to the patient, soothing him gently, preventing any sudden movements, and assured him that the doctor would be coming soon to explain everything. This young, handsome guy had been in a coma in their hospital for 2 years. And today, he opened his eyes for the first time. His penetrating gaze seemed to go straight through her. Jessica had secretly admired him for a long time. She had dreamed of their first meeting when he regained consciousness. Excitement overwhelmed her now. For 2 years, she had taken care of the patient without knowing anything about him, not even his name. They found him barely alive in a wooded area with a head injury. Local doctors gave very little hope for the unknown victim's recovery. He had no documents, no phone, absolutely nothing that could help the police identify him. And now, after 2 years, when all hope seemed lost, he finally woke up from the coma. He looked around in bewilderment. The doctor asked the patient if he remembered anything about himself, such as his name and surname. While examining him, the doctor gave new instructions to the nurses. The guy sadly replied that he couldn't remember anything at all. He asked the doctor why he couldn't remember. The doctor explained that it was most likely due to the head injury and the prolonged coma. The doctor also mentioned that they had reconstructed parts of his shattered skull. He needed rest now to recollect everything. The doctor told him that Jessica would be by his side, and he could always turn to her if he needed anything. The patient looked apologetically at the young nurse. He said he would be glad to introduce himself, but he couldn't even remember his own name. Jessica smiled and told him that all this time while he was in a coma she called him Bill. He didn't mind such a name. Besides, Jessica said that was the name of her late father, who died just before the unidentified patient was admitted to their hospital. He sympathized with her and allowed her to call him Bill. The young people became friends. Since the patient didn't reveal anything about himself, Jessica entertained him with her stories. That way, he learned almost everything about the young girl's life. It turned out that Jessica had lost her parents early in life. She was the youngest child, and people often mistook her parents for her grandparents. She lovingly shared how tenderly her father treated her mother. After her mother passed away, he couldn't live without her and died of a heart attack not long after. They were both only years old. Jessica also told him that she had started working at this hospital right after nursing school. She had a best friend, Sarah, with whom she studied together, and now Sarah dreams of marrying her brother. Jessica laughed as she told about her friend's unsuccessful attempts to set her up with her brother. But he wasn't to her taste. Suddenly Bill asked who was to her taste. Jessica, completely unembarrassed, replied that she liked him, Bill, very much. Then she felt embarrassed by her sudden burst of emotions and quickly changed the subject of the conversation. But Bill looked at her with a penetrating gaze, looking directly into her eyes, and said that he also liked her a lot. However, he hesitated to confess his feelings to her because he didn't even know who he was. The two looked into each other's eyes and realized that there was no one closer and dearer to them in the whole world. When Bill was discharged, Jessica took him to her home. Her best friend was shocked by Jessica's seemingly thoughtless action of bringing a stranger home. Sarah tried to reason with her friend, fearing that they knew nothing about this guest and what if he was dangerous. Sarah expressed all her thoughts and concerns to her friend. But Jessica had something else in mind. Sarah's husband worked as a plumber in a decent company, so she asked her friend if he could help Bill find work. Maybe Sarah's husband could take Bill as an assistant. Although Sarah was a bit upset on behalf of her brother, she couldn't refuse to help. That's how Bill started working with Michael. At first, he was just learning, and it was evident that he had no experience with tools. Michael laughed at him, saying that his hands were definitely not made for tools, but rather for a computer keyboard or playing musical instruments. However, with the desire to learn, one could master anything. Bill did his best. After half a year, he was already going on service calls by himself and skillfully performing his job, no matter how complex. Mitchell suggested that Bill come with him to a big city where he could earn much more. Of course, Jessica was worried and didn't want to let him go. But she understood that he could make good money there. She was already carrying their baby, and the couple decided to save up some money before the birth. Moreover, the city was just a short drive away, and Bill would be with her in just 2 hours. The house they were hired to renovate and replace all the plumbing fixtures was empty. Its owners went on vacation, leaving all the current affairs to their manager, who had to hire workers and do the repairs before their return. The house was large and beautiful. Strangely enough, the house felt painfully familiar to Bill. When he walked through the spacious rooms, he experienced some strange and not very pleasant feelings. He even told his partner that he felt some déjà vu, as if he had been here before and knew the house well. It really seemed like he had seen all these details in a dream before. Michel at that moment was completely oblivious to what his partner was saying. He turned his head to the side, and his gaze froze on a photo on the nightstand. Together, the two men approached closer. The photograph showed a young man in a mourning frame. And this man looked exactly like Bill. Michael called the manager over and asked who was in the photo and if he saw any resemblance to his friend. The manager was stunned, examining Bill and comparing the face of the plumber with the man in the photo. Then he said that he had been working here recently, but he knew for sure that the photo depicted the homeowner's husband, who had disappeared without a trace about 3 years ago. They found only his burnt car outside the city, but there was nobody in the vehicle. The homeowner said her husband's name was Robert. Bill's eyes darkened. Memories flooded back to him like ocean waves crashing against a lighthouse. Bill barely stood on his feet, suddenly realizing the truth. He slowly but distinctly said, "It's me. I'm Robert." Michael looked at his partner in astonishment, not fully believing his words. The young man exclaimed that he had just remembered everything. It was his house. He disappeared almost 3 years ago. And he remembered why. Images from his memories flashed before his eyes again. The autumn rain was pouring as if from a bucket. The gray, gloomy day had worn him out. Robert couldn't wait to return home as quickly as possible. His beloved wife was waiting for him there. He was tired at work. For the past 2 days, he had been traveling to neighboring towns on his father's orders, signing profitable contracts for their company. But no amount of money in the world was worth spending a cold evening together with his beloved Hannah by the fireplace, enjoying delicious coffee and snuggling under a warm blanket. His wife expected his return only the next day. But he couldn't bear these boring negotiations any longer, so he simply postponed the last meeting for the next time. He rushed home, dreaming of pleasantly surprising his beloved Hannah. Robert slowed down near his house and got out of the car under the pouring rain to open the gate. On the garden path, his wife's car was parked poorly. Robert mentally scolded the driver who, for some reason, didn't put the car in the garage but left it to get wet in the pouring rain. Promising himself to scold the lazy driver tomorrow, Robert hurried to the entrance of the house. Even from the street, he could see that the light was on only on the second floor in their bedroom. It was the dim light of a nightlight that Hannah always left on at night. The man headed straight for their bedroom, eager to see his beloved as soon as possible. Robert dreamed of waking his sweetly sleeping wife with a tender kiss. But what he saw was far from his dreams. Yes, his wife was indeed in bed. But she was not alone. Robert exclaimed and then spoke to his wife, saying that he understood why her car was carelessly left in the middle of the lawn. Apparently, they were in a hurry to get into bed. Beside his wife lay their personal driver Thomas. In Robert's absence, he clearly didn't waste any time. Blood rushed to Robert's head. He rushed towards the driver and began to strike him one after another. Hannah screamed that he should stop, as he would kill Thomas. But Robert couldn't control himself and couldn't stop. He pushed his wife aside, and she disappeared from his sight for a while. Suddenly, something heavy hit him on the head, and for a few moments he blacked out. When Robert tried to come to his senses, the situation had drastically changed. After Hannah hit him on the head with a porcelain statuette, Robert fell onto her lover. Thomas pushed him off the bed onto the floor and started hitting him with whatever he could find at hand. Unfortunately for Robert, it was a rather heavy trophy, the pride of the homeowner, a reward from synchronized swimming competitions. As he lost consciousness completely, he could hear his wife's voice asking whether Robert was breathing or not. Then he briefly regained consciousness when the car hit a large bump during the drive. They were taking him as far away from the city as possible. Apparently, the criminals thought he was already dead, so they left his body near a wooded area, hoping that no one would find him in such a remote location. Fortunately for Robert, what the lovers mistook for dense forest in the darkness was actually just a strip of trees. In the morning, mushroom pickers found the dying young man. They called for an ambulance, and he was rushed straight to the intensive care unit. Robert didn't understand why he was considered dead and what happened to his car. Later he learned that the lovers had taken him to the woods in Hannah's car. Apparently, that's what saved his life. They weren't criminals, so they made a serious mistake. They didn't go separately in two cars to burn Robert's car and then return to the city in Hannah's off-road vehicle. Only when they pulled into the yard did they realize their mistake. Robert's car was in the garage. But it was too late to return to the body, as it was already dawn outside. So they simply drove out of the city in two cars, pushed Robert's car into a ditch, set it on fire, and then returned to the city in Hannah's car. Bill, now already Robert, woke up from his memories. The man turned to the manager and said that he was the true owner of the house. He promised to generously reward the manager if he remained silent. But before that, he questioned whether the manager knew or had heard anything about why there was a portrait of Robert in a black frame. Was he officially declared dead? The manager replied that he only knew that they found Robert's car burnt, but they couldn't find the man's body in any of the morgues. Law enforcement officers assumed that he was killed and robbed, and to get rid of the evidence, they burned him together with the car. The owner told the police that her husband often carried a large amount of cash with him, which made him a target for robbers. The police officers believed the woman, as her version seemed plausible. She erected a beautiful monument for her late husband at the local cemetery. The monument even featured a portrait of the man, along with a heartrending text that brought tears to the eyes. Everyone pitied the young widow, especially considering that she was pregnant. Robert turned pale and asked if Hannah really had a child. The manager replied that a few months after her husband's disappearance, she gave birth to a baby boy. The man brought a photo album and showed it to Robert. The album contained pictures of a cute, smiling little boy. Robert asked for water. His head was throbbing from the recent trauma and stress. Even a healthy person would find it hard to remain calm after hearing such news. And for Robert, the consequences of his injury were even more serious. The doctor, upon his discharge, had said that he needed expensive treatment for full recovery. Ideally, he should seek treatment abroad. Nevertheless, worrying was absolutely counterproductive for him. Robert realized that he was not a poor man. Now he needed to gather all his strength to reclaim his true life. That which rightfully belonged to him: his name, his home, his business, and perhaps even his son. He asked the manager Oliver where the child was now. Oliver replied that in the 6 months of his service, he had only seen the boy once, fleetingly. It turned out that the lady of the house had suffered from postnatal depression on a nervous basis. She deeply missed her husband, and her baby was being raised by her grandmother from birth. Recently, the lady had remarried and left for a honeymoon in Paris. Robert asked Oliver to keep it a secret that he was alive. He needed time, as this was a very serious matter. He would have to put a lot of effort into preparing a genuine surprise for his wife. Having reached an agreement with Oliver, Robert went to visit his parents, suddenly remembering his father and mother. His parents had been through a great deal when their son disappeared. Michael, his colleague, had been accompanying Robert all this time. Not too long ago, Michael regarded him as an entirely different person. He couldn't find the right words and just patiently waited for Robert to tell him everything. As they drove, Robert remained silent, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Then he turned to Michael and said he needed time to carefully consider and decide what to do next. He mentioned that they were heading to his parents' house and he might need Michael's help. After all, the news could potentially make his parents unwell. When they arrived at Robert's parents' home, he asked Michael to be the one to gently inform his father and mother that their son was alive. Then he would come in himself. Before the meeting with his parents, Robert was extremely anxious and nervously bit his lips while Michael went to ring the doorbell. An hour later, after an emotional meeting and a flood of tears along with some harsh words directed at Hannah, they all sat together on the cozy veranda sipping hot aromatic tea. Robert's mother held his hand and didn't want to let go of her son. His father was resolute and told him that he never liked Hannah, and he knew it from day one. From the beginning, they had been urging their son not to get involved with this girl. But he was like in a fog, not heeding the voice of reason. Yet she had nearly killed Robert, and then deceived everyone by pretending to be a grieving, sorrowful wife. She came to his parents crying, tearing her hair out. And then she even announced that she was pregnant. She persuaded them that even though they lost their beloved son, at least they would have a grandchild now. The unfortunate parents believed Hannah took care of her like a delicate vase. They arranged for the best clinic, bought everything the child needed, took her on vacations, and even gave her a share of the business. A month ago, she declared her intention to get married. The elderly couple was so grateful for the grandchild that they didn't object to her desire. But now doubts arose about whether the child was truly their grandson. Robert asked where Hannah was now and who became her husband. It turned out she married the same scoundrel who worked as their driver. And now they went off to Paris for a vacation using Robert's money. It was terrifying to see Robert's father. He was ready to personally harm his former fiancée and her accomplice. Robert calmed his father and asked him to remain calm so as not to have heart problems. Now they needed to act cautiously, not to scare away the big fish. Later, Robert told his parents that he was now happy because he was living with the kindest and most caring girl in the world, who was expecting his child. He spoke about how Jessica took care of him while he was in a coma. He promised to introduce his parents to his chosen one. Then the men returned to their respective partners. Sarah and Jessica were quite surprised that they returned earlier than expected. Everyone wondered what had happened in the big city. What they heard from Robert and Michael was simply beyond comprehension. Over the next 3 days, he had to make a lot of efforts to resolve the current issues. All this time, he was waiting for his ex-wife's return from France. Everything was ready for the sweet couple's reunion. They were met by the police at the airport. The evidence was irrefutable and Hannah had to confess to everything. The child turned out to be from the driver. A DNA test confirmed it. For the boy, almost nothing changed. Since birth, he had been raised by his grandmother while his cuckoo mother was pursuing her personal life and now found herself in prison. Robert promised the shocked mother of Hannah that he would not leave her and the child without financial support. Robert regained his business money and his own name. And by the time his daughter was born with Jessica, he had already completed his first course of rehabilitation. They all, as a happy company, went to pick up his beloved wife and daughter from the maternity hospital. The joyous grandparents didn't let go of their long-awaited granddaughter. What else could one wish for? Perhaps only for a son.